Welcome to the C Word, the Conservators podcast. Today we're talking about disability and conservation. I'm Jenna Mathiasen, an objects conservator based in Carmarthenshire.
And I'm Kloe Rumsey, an objects conservator based in Manchester. Welcome to the show.
Yes, and we're in an unusual location today.
We're in the best location. This is the best recording location we've had, I think.
To give you a clue, we are gently rocking.
The sun is shining outside.
There are swans.
There are swans. There's a cat.
We're on a boat. We're on someone's boat, and we have a special guest host today. Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yes, hi, I'm Pierrette Squires, and I'm the team leader at Bolton Museums, also a conservator.
Welcome!
Thank you.
Which feels weird to say, seeing as we are in your houseboat, and we're saying welcome to you.
Thank you for being on the
Welcome to
show.
you too. Thank you for coming.
And thank you for letting us be in your house. Yes.
It's wonderful. The sun is shining, the boat is gently rocking, there's cats.
It's so lovely.
There's people walking around.
Yeah.
It's just super nice.
We're
The
waiting
stove is lit.
for any second when Milo might join in, and Milo being the cat.
Yeah.
And he might start pushing things off the table, which will be exciting. So
I'm hoping for that. To be
you can look
honest.
forward to that.
Yeah. So why are we here? Why are we here talking about disability? Shall we talk about our experiences with disability?
Yes, I think that's probably a good idea.
You start.
Okay. Okay, so this is an interesting thing because I feel like it wasn't until I started filling in forms the way that you do in Britain
Yeah.
that I started thinking about whether I'm disabled.
Yeah.
Because in a lot of these sorts of forms that are about the diversity monitoring and stuff like that, I feel like that sort of thing where it's like, you know, what's your ethnicity and your sexual orientation, and then it also asks, do you identify as disabled? And then it usually had like a little asterisk next to it, and it says, and we define this by being a long-term illness or something that impacts your daily life for 12 months or more, sort of thing.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And then it's
definition.
like...
That's interesting.
It's under the Equality Act of 2010. That's how they sort of define that. So it can be anything that affects your health and your ability to carry out daily tasks. That can be working life or home life. That's the fine print. It's sort of like, this is how we define that. Do you feel like you identify under those terms as disabled? And I was like, oh, I do. I will tick the yes box then, because I do. So I have various long-term illnesses, and I have so many health complications, guys. It's not even funny.
She rattles when she walks.
Yeah. But they're all like, I guess what you would say is unseen. Like unseen or hidden. I don't feel like I hide them, but they're unseen disabilities. So I started ticking the yes box, and that meant that I sort of had another thing to identify as, because previously I hadn't really thought about it. I just thought, well, I'm just someone who's chronically ill, but I didn't really think of it as I'm also disabled, because I sort of felt like it's a very loaded word sometimes. It can be a loaded word. But that's when I really started thinking about it as like, well, no, it does impact my everyday life. It impacts how I work. Actually, I nailed that definition.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting that you started with forms, actually, because for a lot of the time for me, I didn't think about it, apart from when I was applying for jobs.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Because it's the only time somebody directly asks you that question.
Yeah.
And for listeners that don't know me, I'm totally deaf in one ear, and my hearing in the other ear isn't perfect either. So I've got less than 50% of hearing. You can't see it. I don't wear a hearing aid because there's no hearing in my deaf ear to amplify force, so there's no point. So it's really interesting, because until I applied for a job or to be a trustee on something or something like that, I don't usually think about it that much, because most of the time I communicate, I hope, reasonably well with people. Because I had speech therapy as a child, and I had a mother that still now corrects my speech every time something sounds a bit deaf. Most people go, you don't talk like a deaf person.
I was going to bring that up because...
Oh, that sounds like one of those comments that
Yes.
someone says accidentally and then regrets.
Because my other half's sister lost her hearing when she was quite small, but everyone always says, well, you don't sound deaf. And she's like, it's like the number one thing that she really hates is like, well, thanks. I'm glad I pass as a normal human being. Thanks. It's like,
What's the point in saying that?
Oh, it's so odd. People are weird.
yeah. I think it's just one of those knee-jerk reactions of, I feel like I need to say something to that because I didn't realise. Oh, you don't sound deaf. Oh, great.
Yeah, completely. So apart from...
Oh, you don't look disabled. That's another good one.
Yeah, which is very similar.
Yeah.
And so apart from when I have that kind of form to fill in, most of the time it's not forefront of my mind unless I can't hear.
Yeah.
And we'll come on to more of lockdown and the nightmare that mask wearing was. But
Yeah.
in normal, everyday life, it doesn't impact me that much day to day.
Yeah.
Or at least I think it doesn't.
You don't perceive that it does, and that's maybe the important bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, occasionally that has its disadvantages.
May I ask, like, have you been deaf on one ear for a long time?
I've always had some hearing problems, even when I was tiny.
Yeah.
Like, I think 6 weeks old, I was first in hospital with hearing problems, something like that.
wow.
So,
Yeah.
since forever. But it got significantly worse when I was in my very early 20s.
Yeah. Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
That must have been quite a hard time to sort of feel it more.
I think it was harder the fact that it was Meniere's disease that made it significantly worse.
Oh, interesting.
So
That's quite a rare disease.
hearing, yes, the hearing loss wasn't the worst bit for me. The worst bit was that it came with all the dizziness and everything else that very active Meniere's comes with.
Yes.
right.
My mum has that, so no.
Thankfully, it's now not active. Touch wood that it'll not be active anytime soon. Yes.
Yes.
So in a way, it was the bit that actually impacted your life that was the thing.
The much more visible bit.
Yeah, exactly. And if I could just be deaf, thanks very much. That would be great.
Yeah, that would be brilliant.
Oh my God.
Like not having A&E staff going, what drugs have you taken? What have you been drinking? Like, nothing. I'm just dizzy.
Yeah.
Oh God.
It's not about that.
Yes, the discrimination is as bad in the health service as it is in normal public society.
You will find it everywhere. Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
That is true. Chloe, we haven't really covered you yet in terms of...
No.
Do you feel like you fit into this category, or...
I didn't.
You don't have to.
There's a number of things that's gone on for me in the last couple of years that has changed my outlook quite considerably. And we've talked on the show before, I think maybe in episode 1, season 1 of Who Are We?
Yeah. We talked about demographics.
That's the D word that I was looking for. This struggle for language is going to become clear. The demographics indicated that only 2% of... In 2013, only 2% of conservators identified as disabled.
Yeah.
We've also talked about in the past whether or not one would tick the disabled box in job applications.
Yeah.
And I think at the time I didn't, because in 20... when were we doing it? 16?
Yeah,
17.
2017.
We did this episode, another episode, I think it was an emerging professionals episode. I've been diagnosed with dyslexia in university, and I always thought, it's not really a disability though, is it? For some people it is, certainly, but not for me, because it's not that severe. It was that sort of, not that I don't think that dyslexia is a disability, because it obviously it is, and people have it to different extents. And I just thought, well, with the type of work I do and the way that I've managed it through having only been diagnosed with it at 18, I just thought, I just won't. So I sort of left that there, and I think in the past I've begun ticking the box. And then in the last couple of years, I've been starting to think about neurodiversity quite a bit. We've been talking.
Well, dyslexia is neurodiversity.
It is, but this is. So I just thought that I was a bit crap at things, a bit disorganised. Timekeeping is a dyslexia thing, so I thought, whatevs, that might be a thing. You just need to grow up, and I've sort of always thought about, I'm just scatty. I've got a bad memory. I'm, all of the language that was applied to kids. I'm going to say in the 90s, because 90s and early 2000s, because that's when I was at school. All of that language, she's scatty. This head in the clouds, off with the fairies. All of that sort of, you're just not paying attention. All of that. I sort of internalised that, and it did not occur to me. And then since COVID, in fact, but not necessarily just because of COVID, just a number of things happened in my life that raised my stress and anxiety levels to such an extent that I just thought, I took a step back and thought, hang on a minute, this isn't how people are. There's something going on here. But I'm pretty sure I have ADHD, and
it's surprisingly common, and also there.
Can anyone hear the ducks?
Speaking of easily distracted.
I know. They will interrupt you. I walk with animal interruptions.
We're really lucky that the cat isn't shuffling around because he's sitting behind me. And I remember in a lesson there being a noise that kept happening behind me when I was really young, and I could not stop myself from turning around. And I look at that now. I look back on that now, and I'm like, why did no one realise? Why did no one realise that I'm like this? Anyway, I've talked to GP about it, and, I'm not a 7-year-old boy.
Who's acting out
and flicking stuff at the teacher. So, essentially, he says I don't have ADHD because I am a safe driver, I have a job, and I have friends.
I'm like,
oh, okay. And I was so sort of...
It just strikes me as really medieval.
Exactly. And I was so sort of just defeated by that I gave up. And then I spoke to a counsellor about it a few months later, and this counsellor said that ADHD was a sort of fashionable club at the moment, and she didn't see the point in getting any sort of diagnosis because it wasn't really a thing. And I was like, okay, fine, I'm just gonna... That's where we are with it. That's as far as I've gone with it, apart from yesterday thinking about this topic. And I did a online adult ADHD screening with ADHD UK. I imagine it's legit. It seemed legit. Everything seemed good about it. And I filled in the form. And it was one of the, as my partner put it, I got full marks too. Just basically reading through a list of things like, does everyone not do this?
This is what it's like a lot with particularly neurodiversity, I think. It's being introduced to the concept that this isn't how everyone functions.
Exactly.
And it's news to you, like truly. And you're like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. In some ways you can be blissfully unaware of the fact that you're different.
Because it doesn't matter, essentially, if it's not impacting your life.
Yeah, sure, but
you
maybe
can be
it is.
blissfully unaware, but you can also find yourself incredibly frustrated with things of like, why don't you see it this way?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Or why aren't you giving me time to do this? Why are you rushing me? Why are you making this confusing? I've felt like that
exactly
at work, definitely.
So one of the things I discovered in recent years was the term deaf gain.
Oh.
Which is some of the benefits that you have from being deaf.
Oh, nice.
Which is really nice. And unbeknownst to me, a lot of deaf people and a lot of people with other sensory losses develop other heightened sensory awareness around other
That's a thing?
things. Yes.
Oh, wonderful. I thought that was just a thing they said in the films.
Yeah, no, it's an actual thing.
That's wonderful.
And I didn't know that it's very common for people who are deaf to have extremely good spatial awareness.
Of course.
That's a superpower.
Of course.
And I would just get extremely frustrated, sometimes at family, colleagues, other people, sorry to anybody I've been really frustrated at, when they would be either wanting to measure to the nth degree or absolutely insisting something wouldn't fit somewhere.
Right.
Or that it would fit.
When they couldn't see it. And I have realised over the years that if I've seen a space, even if I'm not in that space, even if that space is in a different country, I instinctively know what would fit in that space, down to less than 2 centimetres.
That is amazing.
Wow.
As a conservator, this is an incredibly useful skill when you're moving large collections and you need to tessellate things into a space.
Oh, that's amazing.
I didn't know, and it was only when I started looking in and I went to a brilliant conference in Cardiff actually about disability and accessibility in museums, and then also have been generally talking to people about things more, that this particular thing came up, and I was like, oh, that's why I get so mad at people. Everybody else doesn't think like that.
Oh,
so
that's really interesting.
I give people a bit more space now to not just know.
Because they might not have the power.
Yeah.
That's amazing, because that's sort of, if you didn't have the deafness as well, you'd be like, oh, so that's a neurodiversity, isn't it? And it sort of is. I don't know how you would diagnose it medically.
Yeah, because your brain is wired in a slightly different way to compensate for something.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's amazing.
That's really cool.
I'm jealous. I do feel that there are things about, neurodiversity, but all the way that everyone is that gives you benefits and...
Yeah, that absolutely will be.
And what's the word?
It can be really hard to see those on days when you're in pain or you hate everything or you're like...
Yeah.
It sucks that I can't do that thing that everyone else can. Like, those days suck.
Yeah.
And everyone will have them. But there are definitely, good things too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm grateful I am who I am.
Yeah. People have sort of said to me, whilst I've been going through the sort of, do I diagnose, do I not? Oh, no, wait, I can't, because I don't have £800 to spend on private diagnosis or whatever it is. Do you want medication? And my attitude is, well, no, because I don't really know who I would be on medication. And I don't... when I was talking to the counsellor, she was referring to me as hyper-aware. And that didn't even occur to me that people don't see the world in this way. And I don't like the idea that I would be sort of shut off from the things that I notice. And in a way, that's an anxiety-related, loss of control in my view, but also why if you don't notice something, if I don't sort of become extremely aware of, there's a weird smell, what's going on,
okay, that's like fear of missing out, but
it's exactly fear of missing out,
but not about social media.
Yeah, exactly. I've walked into stores and noticed problems with the collections because of a very faint smell that hasn't been noticed by other people, for example. There are things about the way that everyone is that is distinct, and that's why neurodiversity is so difficult to talk about and diagnose and then make allowances for or not decisions on medication.
A lot of these things are contributions to society, and if society had nobody that noticed the first bit of the smell of the fire something. How many more major things would there be? And I don't know if there's ever been a study to look at how many times was it somebody who was neurodiverse or something else that was the first one to highlight that problem, or to probably quite often. Who will notice a pattern of change or something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
good point.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, I quite like that.
Yeah. I think at this point I want to just do a shout out to a student I had over the summer of 2021. I don't know if they listen regularly or not, but I just want to say that talking with this person really
about superpowers or disabilities?
No, about ADHD in particular.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to say it earlier, but I forgot. That talking with them about their diagnosis and what they noticed in me and chatting about that really, really helped. So thank you for that.
Can I add into that, to anybody who's listening in a position to host any students? I've had a similar experience where hosting a student who had struggled with chronic pain, and being able to empathise at a point where I was particularly ill made a massive difference to me.
Oh.
And you don't just host students for the benefit of the students. Nope, so any students out there who are feeling a burden on your host, it's massively important both for the hosts and for the students. And please, people, host students and provide interesting internships. Because this sort of thing, a lot of the time we're lone working or working in a tiny team.
Absolutely.
And you don't often get to connect with other people who may be in a similar situation in the profession.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's part of being a bit more visible, because I don't know if it's still 2% of conservators who identify as disabled, whether that's gone up and whether that's actually that we're more diverse, or if it's because people have realised that they might have disabilities, or that it's okay to say that you have. Because I think there's been a lot of fear historically about saying that or identifying as disabled, and I think we're letting go of that fear a little bit and the sort of strange stigmas we attach to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if the percentage of people who would tick the box has changed that much from some of the discussions we had as part of the sort of task and finish stuff I was looking at. But I think certainly there's a lot more openness when you're talking to each other these days.
Yeah.
That's the thing for me that's a really big difference.
Oh, that's good.
I definitely think it's more than 2%.
Yeah.
Just thinking of the people I know and I talk to regularly, it's a lot more than 2%.
Yeah.
But I'm not yet sure how much that has filtered down into people feeling safe to disclose things and that there won't be repercussions at point of interview and that kind of thing.
I'm sort of wondering what the fear factor is there. For me, it was much more about reckoning with myself. Like, oh, do I tick this box? Is this me? And it was so much less about what will they think of me. But that's slightly because I'm one of those people who are like, I don't give a shit what you think about that. If it's true, it's true. But I recognise that not everyone is like that. I am a little bit like that. Sorry about that. But it's like, what's the worst thing that could happen? I mean, if you're qualified, you'll still get an interview. Like, they're not really allowed to just discriminate against you.
I suppose the thing is, at what point can you tell when somebody isn't picking you to interview? And that's the thing that people get concerned about.
Yeah,
understandably. Because, you know, if you know they're going to interview maximum 6 people for a job,
Yeah.
and they have a lot of applicants.
Yeah.
At what point do they cull?
Yeah.
And you can't.
And I totally understand people's concern over that.
Yeah.
Because you're exposing yourself.
Yeah, it's true.
It shouldn't need to be a concern. People absolutely shouldn't be culling in that way.
Yeah.
But
you can't tell, that's true.
you can't tell. And if there are some places where they have statistically far fewer people with disabilities than other places, you begin to wonder, is there a reason for that? Is something going on at that selection process? You don't know.
Yeah.
But
sometimes I do feel like it can be a little bit self-selecting in some ways, because you know how job descriptions are sometimes very specifically written, and sometimes it's like, I love that you put this little bit at the end here about how you really appreciate applications from disabled people and people of minorities and all of that, but you've written this job spec in a way that is hostile to anyone who isn't able-bodied. For example, I can't go for any job that demands I have a car and a driving license because I'm not medically allowed to drive, so that's not happening. So if people put that as the essential criteria, and they often do, that means that you're excluding a number of disabled people, anyone of a different socio-economic background who can't afford to have those things.
And also an awful lot of people now who ethically, because of climate change, no longer accept owning and driving a car.
Yes, exactly. I mean,
the world needs to change fast.
So that's like my number one bugbear, I think, where I'm like, look at that. Why? Like, why is it that you can't just decide that you're going to car share if the store is in a remote location, for example, and stuff like that? 'Cause I understand that a lot of the time heritage sites are in weird places, or we store our stuff in a shed, in a field, you know. I've seen all sorts, right? Like, I understand that. But also there's got to be some sort of amount of planning, right? Where it's like, well, we need a van to transport all the stuff in anyway, so we all go in the van together.
And, you know, if there's a fuel crisis and there is no fuel, if they're expecting people to only transport themselves by a fuel-powered vehicle,
you're still not going to be able to get there.
No.
I know, it's bizarre.
And not until the day when self-driving electric cars are the sole thing anyone travels in, which is not here yet.
Yes.
And the reality is people do make do with the stuff that they have, because
exactly.
The number of people that don't have someone to quickly nip over to the store in a car and pick something up is huge, so you just arrange some other way of doing it.
Exactly. The reality is, if somebody had got a job with a driving licence on a job that said essential to have a driving licence, and then lost the ability to have a driving licence anymore for some reason, whether they were doing some dodgy illegal activity, or whether it was, at which point their job might be in risk anyway, or whether it was because they developed epilepsy and were no longer allowed to drive, it would be illegal to get rid of them because they'd developed a disability that meant they couldn't drive. So if it's illegal to do that when somebody develops something, it should also be illegal to discriminate against somebody at employment point
absolutely,
because of a driving licence.
Absolutely.
It's so archaic that...
It's a really weird requirement.
Yeah.
It really is.
If you're in charge of recruitment and you're listening to this, please consider dropping that stuff, because it's ridiculous. just consider alternatives. Anyway, so I wanted to talk about whether are conservators disabled, and can they be? And obviously they can be, because here we are. Obviously, hello. So that's obviously a question that I'm asking in jest. But I find it interesting that we don't really talk about it. I don't really see it very much represented. And again, we're getting back to the 2% of like, oh, it's because there aren't that many. I don't know that that's true, though.
No.
I just really wanted to do this episode so that we could actually talk about the fact that, no, we do exist. And I know, Pierrette, that you've done work here with a task and finish group, and I don't know if you can talk a bit around that, what came out of it. I don't know if you can.
Basically, a little bit. Basically, an awful lot came out that basically everybody just needs to do a lot more. Everywhere needs to change.
Yeah. That is how
You know,
it is.
I mean, this was a task and finish group for the Institute of Conservation, but what we were hearing was the issues within people's workplaces, the issues that people have at recruitment, all sorts of things. There needs to be, and this won't just be within our profession, but particularly within our profession, I think. And I think probably because it's quite a tiny profession, and because there often are those things of you must be able to drive, you must be able to lift, you must be able to, that people have felt excluded before they've even started.
Yeah.
I think there's a huge lack of people with invisible disabilities being visible. And then I think that where there really is a gap is there are very few conservators with visible disabilities.
That's true.
Because when you go to conferences and things, you almost never see people with walking aids in a wheelchair.
Yeah, no.
You know, the much more classical, if you were imagining, most people were imagining somebody with a disability, the things that you would see. I think maybe once or twice I've seen somebody who I would go, oh, that person's disabled, looking at them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's extremely rare.
And I think probably those people feel more excluded than anybody because they will never see somebody like themselves in the space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously difficult with people who have invisible disabilities because it's hard to know when somebody else
unless you know them.
is like you, unless you know them. But I think what has really changed over the last few years is social media. People are connecting much more.
Yeah,
So people know each other a lot more because of that, and will then congregate at things and chat about stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I've taken to wearing pin badges when I go to conferences.
Yes,
to just highlight that, like, yes, so here is someone who is disabled, and you can talk to me about it. Like, sort of making it more of a safe thing of like A, visibility, and B, if this is also you.
Yeah.
I'm safe. No, we just need to do better as a sector, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think talking about it is a huge starting point. You know, a number of people that, because of the task and finish group, all the sort of open roundtable events, then connected with other people who they didn't know were in a similar situation, I think was really helpful for people.
Yeah, because it wasn't really something that Icon really talked about before. Not in a way that I felt engaged, the membership.
Or anywhere really in the profession. You just didn't hear about it. Unlike sort of things like, say, big museums conferences where there had relatively often been a session on something to do with some form of disability or creating an accessible exhibition or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. But you didn't
There
really
really
see that.
wasn't in conservation.
No, not at all. That's so interesting, because I would love to go to a session, whether that's run by a supplier or by conservators themselves, about creating an accessible lab, for example.
Yeah.
I would be all about that. That would be super cool, because you know what? Even if you're able-bodied now, by the time you get into your 60s, and God knows how long we all work now,
70s?
Just thinking about how much you might need to adapt your workspace to getting older. And we all injure ourselves at work. Like, I've definitely self-sustained some of these things. You know, sometimes we just need to adapt our spaces to work with how we're aging, how we're developing, how we're managing our bodies. I would love to see a session like that. That would be so cool.
I feel that we're really used to working to the absolute limit of our abilities,
really
physically
harmful.
and mentally, in conservation, and that is something that's worth acknowledging, that usually we are a team of 1 or 2 when it should be a team of 5 with
20
20 with some, manual handling techs and everything. And I think we're quite used to saying, well, conservation is just a very physical job. Like, it is, but you know, you don't need to be the one that is grovelling around on the floor and picking up heavy things.
Or lifts a sculpture onto the lab bench to treat the patch of corrosion on it.
Exactly. Yeah. There are solutions.
And actually, safe manual handling says that we should be doing a lot less of it, even if you're fully able-bodied.
Yeah. And
would result in far less sickness, back pain, everything else for the people who are fit and well.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I was trying to think, so what are some ways that, like, a workplace might be able to support a variety of disabilities in terms of just like easy fixes? And I was like, well, have some manual lifting equipment, anything that helps.
A range of trolleys.
Yes.
Yeah. Hydraulic lifting equipment.
Actually a ladder that isn't dangerous.
Yeah.
You just need to not work from the assumption that everyone's super able-bodied. And that's not even a difficult assumption. Just imagine yourself on a really bad day.
And in fact, you should just be working from the assumption that if something is more than, and I know there are set kilo amounts when you're looking at manual handling, but more than the amount that starts to cause damage if you do it repeatedly. If those are the collections you are working with, which most people are, because often even if the individual objects there aren't, there are boxes. There should therefore be this set of kit that goes up to this weight of stuff, this set of kit that goes up to this weight of stuff. If somebody was to produce that, I think it would be incredibly helpful as a guide where institutions could then go, oh yeah, our stuff is up to this weight. These are the basic things we need so we are not injuring our staff.
Yeah, that would actually be really good. That would be an amazing resource, really.
I'm not volunteering to write it.
No. But if someone else could, that'd be great.
Yes, please.
do that. Yeah.
Other things I thought was just flexible working, guys. Just a thing of like actually being flexible about that stuff, because like, there are days when I can do a 12-hour day because I'm full of beans and everything's fine. But like there are also days when it's like, this is a 4-hour type day because this is not going to work with the amount of pain I'm in. And like building in some flexibility around that would be great. As a freelancer, that's fine mostly, as long as I can manage that with like fellow people that I'm working with or with clients. But in larger teams, that might be more difficult. But I've seen it done. It's not impossible.
And the thing is, it's not hard when it suits the needs of an institution. I mean, how many of us have stayed until midnight finishing off an exhibition and then been told, it's fine, come in late tomorrow?
Yeah.
That is absolutely the norm in museums.
Yes.
That's
really
flexible working.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now,
absolutely.
why can't a need for an exhibition or a new gallery to be installed not be the only reason for this? And in fact, it be, my energy is such that I'm full of beans today, I'm going to work till midnight. 3 days later, you feel flat out. You just do maybe 2 hours of checking your emails. What's wrong with that if the work is being done?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's different if you're booked in to do a public-facing thing and you're doing a talk or something. Yeah, that needs to be delivered on time.
Yeah, of course. But
for
a lot of our work doesn't necessarily
work like that. And if you are working on an object, if you've got a scalpel held to something that's precious, you don't want to be doing it when you are not at your best.
No, you definitely don't want to do that when you're tired.
It makes total sense for that to be the norm within conservation. Thankfully, I think that's one of the things the pandemic has given us, is more acceptance of flexible working.
Yes, I agree.
My museum now does, flexible, as in sometimes people work from home, sometimes people don't.
And also it benefits everyone. I mean, that's the thing. Like, this isn't just about disabled people. It literally...
No, yeah.
Anyone.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I dropped 2 hours a week a few years ago now, when as well as hearing problems and things, I also have endometriosis, which means sometimes I have really bad pain. At the moment, I'm incredibly well, partly because I dropped 2 hours a week.
Yeah.
On days where I'm not feeling great, I do a shorter day because that's been done as a reasonable adjustment. It's kind of not questioned that that's what I do.
Yeah.
And it's made a massive difference. And so people say to me, you look really well at the moment. And occasionally I'm thinking, maybe I should go back up to, and I'm like, no, it's not worth it.
No.
It's just not worth it.
Potentially of going back to ill health.
Exactly.
Just not right.
And, my quality of life at the moment is back to my fit for me, healthy quality of life, which is being able to see all of my friends, go to gigs, do all of the fun things, not work the minute I get home, fall asleep on the sofa and do nothing else, which is also what often people don't see with particularly invisible disabilities. They don't see how much downtime you need outside of work.
Yeah.
It really shocks people.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
And people thinking, oh, they're being flaky because they're not willing to meet up on a weekday evening or something. But what they're not seeing is that you get home and you fall asleep for 2 hours before you then have the energy to wake up and cook dinner.
Yeah. No, exactly. That was my life for many, many years.
Which people, that's not normal.
Yeah. And the fact that I no longer do that, because for a long time, I was sort of resigned to this is what life is. Like, this is just what my energy levels are going to be like, and they're only going to diminish over time because, I'm getting older, whatever. This sort of weird defeatist attitude of, well, this is what real work is. You work these hours, there is no flexibility, and all that means is that as soon as you get home, you fall asleep for 2 hours, and then you get up and groggily make dinner, and then maybe you sit on the sofa before you fall asleep again.
Yeah,
what a great life that is, right? And I was just like, this is what it is now. And then everything changed, because I could do my own thing. I could set my own hours. I could manage my energy levels in a way that I would previously be unable to. And I have energy. I do things now. I have hobbies again.
What?
And the thing is, once that cycle is broken, you then have energy to look after yourself more, to... If you're somebody, I like to swim. I've gone back to the pool. I swim lots. I do loads of exercise. And that when I was little, I danced for hours every week. That for me is normal for me, is to be able to do a lot of exercise each week. When you have zero energy because it's sapped with pain, or with, if your energy is spent dealing with frustrations caused by neurodiversity in a workplace that isn't being facilitated, that kind of thing, you then don't have the energy
at all,
to do the stuff that is actually better for your body and your mind outside of work.
That would recharge you.
Which then recharges you and then gives you more energy to work. And it's so important to be able to break that.
Oh, you told me something interesting about
Oh, God.
social model versus medical model.
Yes.
And I was like, what does this mean?
One of the reasons that I've been thinking about my own disability identity is that in the museum that I work in, we've got an exhibition on, a whole 2-year programme on disabled people's rights, and it's called Nothing About Us Without Us, which is one of the key campaigns in disability rights activism, which is essentially the sentiment, people won't provide us our access needs without us being involved, is the sort of the vague description of what that campaign movement means. So we're doing a community curated exhibition. We've got a team of community curators with their various disabilities, and they are variously activists in the field. And a couple of weeks ago, last month, we did, so they provided, or one of the members provided training, social model of disability training. And all members of staff received this training, and it was really interesting because it talked a lot about how we think about disability in society and what it means to be disabled, the language that we should use around disabled people, and the simple message that people are disabled by society and their environments rather than their disabilities. People have lots of different opinions about this, and I've spoken to people who are disabled as well, and saying, well, I don't really know that I feel disabled by my environment. Sometimes I'm just more ill than others. And I'm like, okay, I get that. And I think it varies for different people. But in essence, it was communicating mindfulness, I guess, in a way, like think about these things better. Think about talking about these things better, and not just to not insult everyone you meet.
That is a good start.
Don't say, oh, you don't sound deaf. To everyone who says that they're deaf. But I'm trying to find a way to describe the difference between so the training was, the core of it was the difference between the medical model of disability and the social model of disability. I should point out that this training was provided by the GMCDP, and because of my neurodiversity, I am learning that I cannot do acronyms. Which is hilarious, considering how many acronyms there are in campaigns in general, but also
in heritage.
So it's Greater Manchester Coalition for Disabled People. That's it. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Nice.
So thank you for providing this training. It was very interesting.
I mean, I just out of curiosity, was it sort of like the medical model being there's something wrong with you?
Essentially.
And the social thing being more that...
Yeah. During this training, they provided it in, all the
Yeah, fair enough.
the sensible descriptions that I won't be able to provide. I'm just getting the information.
No, but it's interesting to think about, like, how... sort of who imposes the labels, maybe? Or
Yeah.
in what way you think about it. That's a fair enough thing. Kloe has notes and everything.
I have notes. A lot of it was about language that we use, like...
Tell me about language use. Like, what... Is it like, don't use these words?
Basically. But it's... So, for example... disabled, and this is all changing as well. It's one of these, like,
constantly evolving.
One of the things, and that's one of the things that sometimes I struggle with. But there is a difference because, for example, disabled people is different from people with disabilities. I feel maybe in recent years people were thinking that people with disabilities, the term, was more respectful than disabled people. But the GMCDP argue that disabled people indicates that the disability is almost imposed on you, rather than people with disabilities is you are a person. Those
you are a person.
Exactly.
Okay, okay.
So disabled people is considered the preferred term. People with disabilities is often used instead. People believe that by putting the person first, you are focusing on the individual and not the disability.
That's not true. Okay.
If we look at language through the lens of the social model, this doesn't make sense. Disability is the barriers and discrimination disabled people experience in society. So disabled people do not have disabilities. The disability is out in society, not within the disabled person.
Okay.
So they are disabled. They're inherently able, but they are disabled by what's going on around them.
That's a good explanation. I like that. But that's the level of complexity that's necessary to talk about, because already I wasn't really on board until that was explained to me.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. The medical model is basically you would go to the doctors and then they would say, this is your illness and you are disabled for these reasons.
Rather than society are doing this thing.
Yeah, exactly. Society indicates that everything has to be up 3 flights of stairs, therefore you're disabled.
Oh my god, that's another bugbear of mine with conservation, where it's just like, well, just put the conservation studio in the attic with no lift access for objects or you.
Yeah, exactly.
What happens if someone breaks a leg? Aside from the fact that, even if it's temporary, this is going to be a pain in the butt.
Completely.
I have all sorts of opinions about that.
Yes.
Why are we always in such pressured deadlines? Why do we need to, the number of projects I've worked on where you're just lucky that someone hasn't been hit by a bus or caught flu, and the fact that it's perfectly reasonable to have colleagues and to yourself just wake up one morning and not be able to bend down or walk across a room, or that shouldn't be a problem, except it is if we're working to such tight deadlines to such a line where, okay, so the only person with a plan of what the exhibition is going to look like can't get out of bed. Great.
Yeah.
Okay,
or there is no plan of an exhibition and somebody's coming in going, oh, these 3 extra objects, I know we open tomorrow, but you can sort them, can't you?
Yeah. That's right.
Kind of no. Actually, no.
Yeah, it's okay to say no, people.
Yes.
Exactly.
I mean, I've never had anyone be a dick to me when I've said, I can't do that because of my strain injury, or I can't do that because I'm not physically able to right now.
Yeah.
I don't have enough spoons for that.
Yeah.
I have had people be difficult. Usually not so much where it's around physical things. And I think this is, again, it's weird. While people with visible physical disabilities seem to be the least represented in conservation, actually when you give somebody a reasonable physical reason for not being able to do something, they're usually respectful of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
When it's something to do with not being able to hear, or energy levels, or finding that thing stressful, and it being something that somebody neurodiverse is struggling to process, I have seen much more active, it'll be fine, just
Stop
get on with
silly.
it, kind of.
Yeah,
that is true.
it doesn't seem to make sense with the sort of demographics we see in the profession for those reasons.
Exactly.
Because there's a huge number of neurodiverse conservators.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting because that is where I've seen the more direct, or have heard people telling me about the stuff that they've experienced. For myself, asking for things like things to be captioned, and people not thinking that's reasonable, or not taking
that.
Or not taking the time to really understand why, or repeatedly having to tell the same people that their faces need to be well lit if they're going to talk to me while they're on a screen or something like that.
I see, of course. Yeah. While conservation might be more, I'm going to say hostile to physical disabilities.
Yes.
Because of what do you mean you can't lift this over your shoulder and run upstairs? Like, what do you mean you need a ramp? What do you mean you need to rest your hands? Whatever.
Why wouldn't you be able to reach the cupboards that we've got?
What do you mean you need to be warm?
Exactly.
That's a very annoying thing.
Yeah, exactly. What do you mean you can't do the pest traps, even though most of them are underneath something heavy? Whatever.
Yeah.
People seem to accept things more if you say, I can't do that, I've got back problems. Maybe it's the permanency, though. I've sort of interrupted myself with my thought that maybe it's that if you've got a back injury, then it's the understanding is that it's temporary, or at worst a couple of months, and that person will get back to full working capacity. But if it's a disability, potentially people are like, oh great, so you can't just magically do all the things.
Yeah, maybe, but
I'm not sure.
But I'm also wondering if it's things like, I feel like people can sort of relate to maybe some amount of pain, but it has to be a pain that people can relate to, like an arm or a leg.
That's true.
It can't be my insides are hurting. Like it can't be that, because then that's gender specific, or it has to be a lived experience sort of thing. But if it's something like I've really busted my hand, or my back is awful today, there's a certain amount there of people might know what that feels like, and that's enough of a trigger point that they can be respectful for a time, even if they don't realize that for you that's forever.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Versus for them it's for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that is around the energy stuff as well. I wonder whether COVID will have changed that, because for a lot of people, even when they've recovered quite quickly after COVID, they've had no energy for 6 weeks or so.
Yeah.
And that to me is very similar to that lack of energy you have when you're in chronic pain.
Yeah.
Where you might have enough energy to go back to work, but you are kaput for hours afterwards.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for anybody who's never experienced that kind of lack of energy from chronic illness, chronic pain, or from just having to process a lot of stuff, it's very, very similar to that feeling.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether there'll become a bit more empathy over that, because a lot of people have experienced it now.
Yeah.
That's true.
I don't think we've had that mass experience of it before.
That's probably true, actually. And a lot of people are still contending with long COVID in terms of, long-term effects on energy levels and a lot of other things. So I think we have to have a more empathetic outlook as a society, because there's just more of us now.
Well, language is changing as well, though, isn't it? Because now we would more commonly come across the word fatigue, even if you don't sort of have a chronic fatigue or long COVID or something. You could say at work, I'm sorry, I have fatigue today, or whatever, I'm suffering from this today. And that is very distinct from I'm really tired today. Because people assume, you should have gone to bed earlier, or your diet's
have another
shit.
cup of coffee.
Yeah, exactly. Have another cup of coffee. Power through.
Here's a Red Bull.
Exactly. And actually, fatigue's a really good. It's not a term I usually use, but you're right, because for a lot of people, particularly people who are usually well and fit, tired for them is when they've had a late night, have partied a bit too hard, and often, therefore, it's combined with whatever they've imbibed in the process, and not really a comprehension of that kind of fundamental lack of energy. It's a completely different feeling.
Yeah.
It's it's so, they're so far removed from each other that most people just have no comprehension of what the other one is.
Yeah.
It is a misnomer to call it tired for a lot of people, because if you say tired, most people think you need some more sleep.
Yeah.
I was sort of wondering if we wanted to talk about disability in collections, because we're not very well represented in museum collections and heritage situations.
Or can we
aside from workforce?
So we've mainly focused on workforce, haven't we? Because that's where
we're at.
That's where it came from, the idea of doing it. And
I think where a lot of the frustrations are.
Exactly, and possibly the sort of workplace tensions potentially as well. And I think we came up with this episode after the Conservation Matters Northwest, when somebody, I know the name but I haven't asked permission to discuss it, so did a really good talk about how she struggled during COVID because of hearing impairment, and it was cannot, and nobody was giving.
It was an amazing talk.
Yeah,
it was absolutely fantastic, and another really good example actually of where people don't know each other within the profession, because I didn't know that person, and it totally mirrored my frustrations. And it was so nice to have that moment of connection of, this is my world as well at the moment.
Okay, so is this to sort of think about the face masks covering up faces so you can't lip read,
and all the online stuff, and just basically
nothing's captioned,
and how disabled you were by society because of that. Because where I said a lot of the time for my deafness, I don't think about it unless I'm doing a ticky box, or at least I didn't most of the time. And then along comes everybody being both needing to wear masks and working from screens most of the time, and suddenly it's a massive disability. I can't buy something in a shop because I can't hear what somebody's telling me at the till. I can't order in a restaurant. Obviously I can if there's somebody with me, and eventually I muddle through because thankfully I'm confident and will make it work.
But it means you have to rely on someone else as well.
You're relying on somebody else, and you're feeling like you're stupid because you're not understanding what people are saying, and then that has an impact on how you're feeling about yourself. It's horrendous. So the importance of that kind of that sharing and demonstrating the impact to people at a conservation conference is so important.
It was brilliant, wasn't it?
It was brilliant.
Shall we say it was Claire Dean?
Yes.
You're great.
Thank you, Claire.
Dean. Thank you. But I imagine the Science Museum has quite a bit of collection. In fact, I know the Science Museum has quite a bit of things like prosthetics and,
the welcome
movement aids. There was the welcome element of the Science Museum store. But during the exhibition, Nothing About Us Without Us exhibition at my museum, we searched the collection for things, and there was very little.
And
that's really interesting for a campaign museum.
That's true.
Really, really interesting.
I think there's two things in that. There's very little physical stuff, as in, crutches, hearing aids, whatever the thing may be. There's also, and this is where historically society haven't been very open and accepting and haven't felt the ability to be so. And also there's been a lack of recognition of things previously. So it's not just about the stuff, it's about the people that stuff belonged to. Because while there might not be those objects, there certainly will be paintings that were owned by somebody with whatever the disability is. I know that a lot of our Egyptology collections at Bolton came into the museum because of Annie Barlow, who wore calipers.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Amazing disabled woman who trekked over Egypt and all sorts of stuff. That's a massively important bit of disability history. There's going to be loads of museums, particularly, medical care was worse in the past. There are going to be more people with untreated disabilities that impacted them more day to day than we get impacted now by things. It's not recognised. How often in an art gallery or wherever do you read a label that talks about what that person lived with?
Absolutely. You're more likely to get the sort of, this person owned this company and this is where they got their wealth.
Exactly.
End of.
This was paid for by a wealthy patron.
And I think in other areas of diversity and inclusion, some of that work is being done very actively by museums and institutions now. So, for example, when we're looking at the queer community, you quite often see where people have been doing that research and will say, oh, this person was part of this friendship group, we now know this. While we might not have a written bit of evidence, we can,
infer heavily that.
Yeah. Maybe a bit of that could be done around disability, because there will be evidence there.
Yeah,
that's such a good point.
And, that thing of seeing yourself in a space and therefore feeling safe to out yourself in that space of whatever the thing is will help. So, if you're a conservator that has the privilege to work on something that was, if I was working on something that was owned or created by a deaf person, I would feel a stronger connection towards it.
Yeah,
I get
definitely.
that.
But that knowledge often isn't there.
No.
Yeah.
So, more PhDs needed.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely, yeah.
It's so interesting because I'm trying to think of if there's, because, I've mostly worked in social history collections and industrial collections, and you'd think there'd be more stuff in there, but I'm trying to think there would have been maybe a prosthetic arm from a, say, World War soldier, someone who lost a limb, a cane, often canes, but usually from rich people. Rich people canes.
And often to do with old age rather than...
as opposed to someone who will leave you on as a young person. Quite slim pickings there.
I suppose the ones that spring to mind of what I've seen in my museum, we've got Michael Foot's cane, because he broke his foot, and then it was never, he used a cane after that. And, I mean, it's not communicated as disability, it's just, this man was famous for walking on with a cane. The exhibition that I've seen that has mainly communicated disability of a famous person has been the Frida Kahlo exhibition.
For sure,
Fantastic.
because she's a very famous disabled person.
Exactly, and her artwork was about disability, and it was a progression of illness throughout her life, which shaped her life, and then ended her life. And all of the prosthetics and all of that artwork that came out of it was so much part of her identity. There doesn't seem to be any sort of, this amazing entrepreneur, also they were disabled.
No.
Yeah, it's
exactly.
Weird. It has to be part of the story in order to communicate it.
Yeah.
We just don't have that.
I mean, we have a sculpture, I can't remember the name, which is driving me a bit potty, at work. And not long after I started, there was some discussion about, should it be touched or shouldn't it? And sort of at the core of conservation. And it's this very tactile, carved stone object. And it makes you want to touch it. And I did some looking into it and it was by a blind sculptor who had designed them to be touched.
So
and
the point is to touch it.
The whole point is to touch it. And yes, that's going to get dirtier.
Yeah.
Yes, there may be conservation implications to that.
But it's the point.
But that's the point.
Oh, yeah.
And, if that knowledge hadn't been there about that person, now I was lucky that the knowledge was there and you could find it quite easily. If it hadn't been, the whole point of that artwork would have been lost. Because it's nice to look at, but what it makes you want to do is reach for it. And that was the whole purpose.
Yeah. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
If you do come across disability in collections, it does tend to have a sort of freak show aspect to it.
Yeah.
Rather than this is human beings with disabilities who, like...
Shall we talk a bit about disabled visitors?
Yes, let's, because that's the one thing that I feel like museums are doing quite okay on is actually being arguably better with access for visitors than for staff.
Yeah,
sort of across the board, really.
Yeah. I can certainly speak for my museum in that respect.
Presumably because they can get more shit for it if they're not. Publicly, they can be more shamed if it's like, I came to this. Let's say National Trust property and they didn't have a ramp, like that. Then that will be an outrage. As opposed to, I work for this National Trust property and they
and I
don't
think
have a
the
lift.
thing is, it should be equally accepted to have a rant about that not being fair.
Absolutely.
But part of where we're talking about the barriers to employment is you are then fearful that you will be seen as the difficult person that causes the issue, that raises the issues, and makes an organisation pay for stuff. When we know nobody's got any money. Yeah, exactly. Whereas when it's a member of the public, other members of the public are brilliant. You've made them pay. I can now go there too.
Exactly.
What we don't see within the workforce is brilliant. You've made them pay. Now I can work there too.
Yes, exactly.
And the attitude should be the same.
Yeah, it really should be. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. we have recently had, what was it called? An access review, I think. We're doing an awful lot of access review stuff. And, this reviewer came round and looked at things like, barrier height and type of doors and barrier colour and the loos and the floor surface and all of the things, light levels and stuff, which is interesting, and I want to talk about that. Yeah. And it's something that you can do, and it's they don't say, "Ooh, you slap on the wrist, you're bad." They'll say, "These are the things you can do to improve," and that's then you know what you may need to apply for funding to achieve. That it's sort of guided quite a lot of things of what we're doing in our exhibition about disability, because that's one of the things we want to.
That's really good.
The whole thing is being designed based on being as accessible as possible. So there's large format labels, there's things at accessible heights, there's various other things. I can't remember what we're doing about barriers, but interestingly, I know that our exhibition officer has not been able to find a barrier type that conforms with the sort of accessible requirements. And I think off the top of my head, I think it's something about height, it's something about the number of, say, by barriers I'm talking about metal stands, short metal stands with a elastic string rope. I think it's considered best practice to have 2 ropes, and there's no option for that. Rope colour we use grey, and that's not ideal because it's not contrasting, but there isn't another option for something. Oh my gosh. So I think there's more, in terms of provision for equipment that you can buy, that work needs to be done. Yeah. But it's really interesting. During the process of working with the community curators, actually, I did some sort of working with object handling training with them. This is how you would do it, and this is, I encourage you to try if you are comfortable to. All of that. And one of the questions one of them asked us, in the conservation studio, they said, "It's very bright in here. Why is it okay for it to be bright in here, but it can't be bright in the galleries? Can we make it brighter in the galleries?" And so I started thinking basically about what would we need to do. Obviously, we can't increase the light levels drastically across the board. But I was thinking, could we do like brighter mornings? On, 1 day a month, you increase the light levels by 50 lux.
That's a pretty common thing, to be honest.
Oh, is it?
As far as I've seen.
Yeah.
It's quite common to have things like quiet mornings, so you're open
we have
early,
that.
For example, but also high visibility days, and that can be an afternoon where everything's extra bright, for example, so that like the aging population can see what's on display, because frankly, it's not just about disabled people; it's about like eyesight declines throughout our lives. That's just how it is.
Yeah,
I think it's also a bit about an acceptance that no one space is going to be accessible to everybody. And spaces that may be not accessible, for example, it's a dark space that either for the collections or for how you've chosen to display it, there's some questions as to why you might make those decisions. A dark, you could make brighter temporarily. But one of the things we really looked at Bolton when we were redoing the Egyptology gallery spaces was looking at there always being somewhere that each person should be able to access.
Oh, that's nice.
That's a good compromise, yeah.
So, and then made it so that the collections that would be too sensitive in one space weren't in that space or were in the other. It does mean that you choose not to have some of that type of thing in that space.
Yeah.
But if that means that that whole space is accessible to that type of person, then they always know there's a bit of it that they love, that they can go and feel quiet and calm in because it's dark and quiet, or feel like they're really happy because it's bright and lots of stuff going on. That balance for people, I think that's, for me, that's one of the things that's important, is for each person to feel included.
Yeah.
So one of the other things we've tried to do a bit is make it known when we've had people who make themselves known to us, that if there's somebody who has sight problems that wants to be able to touch more, we can do some tailored touch tools for people.
Yeah.
So it's about doing it so that acknowledging the fact that by the nature of museums, a lot of things, if you're going to not have them being at risk of theft or vandalism, you want to protect them behind barriers. That's the nature of those types of collections.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are arguments against it. You could just go, well, everybody should be allowed to touch everything. They're owned by the public. But they might only last a week. If you had a case full of jewellery that everybody could touch at all times, you're going to have no jewellery left.
Yeah.
So it's a bit, there needs to be a bit of a kind of balance there with things. And I think the places that do it really well are the places that manage to make it so that you can go in, and even if there's no staff around, everybody's off sick, whatever the thing is, and you're in there by yourself and you can't access any of the interpretation, you still have an experience that you can engage with.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, as conservators, we need to be thinking around how we're treating objects. Are we making a big fuss to the curators going, nobody can touch any of this stuff? This thing must be under such dark light. Does it really need to be? Or could we choose that we put in a bit more effort to swap one item over more often?
Yeah.
That facilitates something being better lit. And that takes a bit more of our time. And do we then advocate for that being part of our core role?
Yeah.
Because I understand that a lot of these things mean that you're having to take a bit more time, and with the lack of staffing, a lot of the time people are wanting to say, okay, we're not touching this gallery for another 10 years. But actually, if that means that then you're not meeting the needs of your public,
What good is that?
what's the point?
Yeah.
I think that's where it's important for conservators to really understand what those things are, so that we can advocate for why we spend the time to do the things in a different way.
And if you're interested in touchy-feely topics, then
There
you
was a
should
whole episode about
whole
that.
episode on it. And I'm traditionally more anti-touch than
I know you are.
Pierrette and Jenny.
Who are like, let's just rub visitors' faces on it. That's not really what we're doing. But maybe a little bit more enthusiastic.
Yeah.
So CPD and the pandemic. One of the things that I have heard from a lot of private conservators is how they have found it much easier to do their CPD because so much has been online, and they've therefore been able to listen to things and attend conferences.
Yeah.
Has that been worse for you?
For me, it has been the complete opposite. I've felt completely isolated because it's just not accessible to me. And if I am doing something online, it requires 150% of my attention. It's exhausting. And so I would never choose, unless it's so interesting and it's the only way it's being done and I desperately want to hear it, to attend a conference online or a training session. I have done a few because that's been the only thing available. But for me, it's been the complete opposite. I've felt like I've had 3 years of not having anything. And there will be other people with hearing problems, other people whose neurodiversity finds it makes it hard for them to pay
focus on a
attention
screen.
for that time, who feel the same.
That is a really good point.
It's a spaghetti mess, isn't it? Of different accessibility needs.
Absolutely.
Because I've found it's been fantastic, because I struggle to sit in a lecture theatre, and if I'm listening to it, I
for
can
like
be
5 hours.
I can be doing my conservation. I can be listening into stuff. It's not even for me about whether or not I can get there. Obviously there's an element of that, and anxiety and money and all of that, but even if it was captioned, you'd have to constantly be watching the captions.
Absolutely.
So your ideal would be I suppose the ideal for lots of people, actually, isn't it, that you'd have something provided on Zoom but held in person?
Yes. Every time for me. And the massive problem with it is, for the vast majority of people, me included, if I can't attend something that's in person that I must be at, the absolute worst for accessibility is hybrid. Because most of the time, when something is an in-person thing that people then also do online, a few organisations are very, very good at it. Museum Next being one. They're very good at the sort of tech side. But for a lot, it's almost like the making it online is then the secondary. It's the backup thing. And there isn't captioning funded. There isn't. It's not really clear sound. and all of that. So I think if something is hybrid, it needs to absolutely be treated as if it's just online, quality of recording and everything. But yeah, for me, I'm just totally excluded. If something's just online, that's it. I lose accessibility to those things.
Yeah.
But that means that it's an excellent time to mention to people that don't give up on having things in person, because in fact they are still really important.
They're really important.
Because I feel like people sort of went like, oh, if I don't want to do webinars, then I'm doomed, basically. Like the fact that anyone who lives rurally, for example, like just doesn't have the broadband to be able to do a presentation to 100 people. It doesn't matter. Like the bandwidth's not there.
But equally, stuff that is just online, or can be both, ideally in my world, is far more accessible for a lot of people for whom lying in their bed while they attend the conference, it actually means they focus more and they learn more, because their pain is such they can't sit in a seat that's different to their specialist seat that's been bought for where they work.
Absolutely. I'm going to go with the takeaway is do a bit of both.
Do both and accept it. Different sort of requirements. The requirements are different from those that of the people organising it.
And similarly to where I said museums need to have a bit of everything within the galleries, I don't expect to be able to access every single training thing. But for example, if it's disaster response training, there might be a big conference that's online only that I can't access. But at some point, there needs to be some training that is in person of some sort, because otherwise I would never be trained on that thing. So I think that's the message that needs to go to people that are producing training. It's not that there has to be this massive expense and that everything is accessible to everybody. It's that within the package of things that they create for people, something ought to be accessible to each type of person.
So what would you like to talk about? Because you said that there was what was it, AIC disability document that's just come out. I haven't heard of any of this because I'm bad at keeping up to date with things.
Well, the hilarious thing is that I don't know how recent it is because I'm bad at paying attention sometimes. But I did. But it was a recent tweet anyway that they have this accessibility in conservation report. So this is the American Institute for Conservation, which is their survey results from what looks to be a 2021 survey that they did.
Oh, recent then. Recent.
Yeah. So it's not like, this isn't like outdated or anything. But yeah, I'm not sure when the actual report came out, because I only just saw the tweet about it, and it was in the last few weeks. I sort of feel like it's definitely after we'd had this talk with Pierrette that I was like, oh, that would have been nice to talk about, but and then hence why it's sort of shoehorned in as an extra bit after our talk with Pierrette.
What do you mean shoehorned? It's an additional
seamlessly edited. Of course.
No one will notice. It's fine.
Yeah, because no one will notice that we're no longer on a boat with Pierrette.
And that the sound quality is completely different.
And there's no ducks in the background.
There's no ducks. Yeah, there is a dog now.
That's true. But he doesn't make duck noises, which is slightly disappointing. So the survey seems to have been in 2021. And just looking through the executive summary, it seems like it was distributed to AIC members and allied professionals. There were 558 complete responses. And
that's pretty good.
29% identified as having a disability or disabilities, much higher than certainly our reported 2% over here.
In 2013, absolutely,
They do say that a very small percentage of respondents had visible disabilities, so it's still mostly hidden or unseen disabilities. 41% of the people who identified as having disabilities reported feeling understood and supported by colleagues. That's both higher than I expected and lower than is desired, because that still means that the majority are not supported or understood.
Yeah, I think when you first said that, I was like, oh, hey, do feel supported. Oh, wait, it's only 41%.
I know, I had the same reaction when I was like, oh, I expected it to be lower. That's terrible that I expected it to be lower. That's not good. That's a terrible expectation. they sort of pulled out 4 major areas of sort of improvement here for maybe future focuses for their equity and inclusion committee and stuff like that. So that's lack of awareness of existing resources. So many people are not aware of existing resources that may help create more accessible opportunities and spaces, including information that's already on the AIC web pages, which is interesting. So people just don't know where to look.
Is it because it's hard to find?
Yeah, and maybe if you have no idea that they exist at all, why would you look?
Yeah.
Then we have lack of awareness of challenges for colleagues with disabilities. So those who identify as not having disabilities are neither fully aware of the challenges faced by their colleagues, nor the number of AIC members who identify as having disabilities. I mean, it was a higher number than I thought, so that is pretty striking. But I mean, I think it's pretty common for people without disabilities to sort of be blissfully unaware.
Yeah.
In a way that's not desirable. Obviously, it's not desirable. But that's one of the reasons that we're doing this episode, is that
exactly.
Try
But also,
to raise awareness. The next one was hybrid and virtual events provide opportunities for greater accessibility for members with disabilities. Yeah, so that's one that we have also noticed over the course of the pandemic. And it's possible that some of these practices could be incorporated to make in-person events more accessible for the field. Yeah, that's like a no-brainer. And then the last one was people with disabilities need to feel heard and their challenges recognized, even if they cannot be fully addressed, which, I think that's fair. Maybe reason number 2 of doing this episode. So looking through this, there are some interesting sort of things to pick out. Obviously, 71% said that they do not identify as disabled. So that, it's still pretty able-bodied, but I don't know enough about American demographics to know whether that's representative of the overall population or not. I have no idea. The breakdown of what types of disabilities people felt that they had were things like 21.4% said chronic health condition, 20.3% said psychological condition.
Oh, psychological condition. That's a phrase, isn't it?
Which I guess is what we would term mental health. Yes, and then the autism spectrum disorder, there was a footnote about that. Maybe it should have been bundled in with neurological conditions. And honestly, this is probably what we now call neurodiversity over here, but it's just different terminology, I think. And that's, fair enough. Quite a lot of variety here. So you had people hard of hearing, people with vision impairments, learning disabilities, ADHD got a special category, 8%.
That is much lower than I thought it would be.
And then 9.4% said they have physical mobility issues, which is sort of higher than I thought, but also not, because I also don't know what sort of age range we're talking about here.
Yeah.
How long have you had a disability was an interesting question. 29.4% said born with, 43.7% said developed before current career, and 26.9% said developed after pursuing current career. We'll link to this in the show notes so that you can read the report yourselves. Disability awareness and support is the next category. I think this one deals with whether or not people have disclosed their disabilities to the supervisor or employer. So here we got 16% saying did not feel it was necessary. 11.3% said accommodations could be made without disclosure. 20% said they were uncomfortable sharing. 22% concerns that the supervisor will see me as less capable. That's kind of
man, that's disappointing.
3.3% fear of harassment. And then 14.7% said they're concerned that it would not remain privileged information, which is also sucky. Horrible to have to worry about that. The next one is about accessibility issues in the classroom or workplace. The runaway leader here with 68% is the need for a flexible schedule. Again, flexible.
Oh, wow.
Working conditions. That's a whole thing. So challenges in accessing conservation resources. There seems to be quite a spread here, but the biggest category by 39% is conferences. So I'm guessing that's accessibility issues at conferences. Which does seem to come up a fair bit. 26.8% say the same thing about webinars, and 34.1% about lectures. Yeah, just in general, it seems like people are really struggling in CPD and training in terms of provisions, which sucks. That's really awful. I mean, it sort of reminds me, because something I really wanted to include in this episode was some great stuff about disability in the museum workforce that they did at the museum's conference this year. However, the disability session was not one that was streamed online. So it was not accessible to people who were not there in person. And
what?
That was not made clear beforehand, and it really annoyed me because it meant that I really missed out. But there you go. I just don't get to see that because I'm not there, which will also be the case for other disabled people. So it's just like, did you just make our session unavailable? Was that not a bit shit? Anyway, that's definitely my feedback for that. Oh, they have something about age range here. Nice. Okay, let's figure this out. The smallest group is 14% people between 18 and 25. That's sort of what I would expect, to be honest. Mm-hmm. The next group up is 25%. They are 45 to 54. And after that, it's pretty equal between all of the other age groups. So, so like mid-30s for all of them, basically. So that, it's pretty well represented in terms of ages. I think it's always good to see more research on this, more numbers, because we all need to know more about this stuff.
More about each other.
Yeah.
Dear Jane, is it necessary to undertake an accreditation assessment in order to have a career in conservation? Love from Kay. Thank you very much for your inquiry via the C word. Luckily, we have your contact details, so I was able to find out a little bit more about your inquiry. For those of you who are not in the UK, accreditation is a professional recognition of your competence that is arranged via the professional body, via ICON, and it follows quite an extensive reporting of your achievements, and then this is confirmed via professional assessment, including site visits. So it's quite a high standard of competence. It's quite a reasonably high threshold that you have to pass, and it's no small task to undertake, as well as you have to pay a significant fee. So it is a big deal. So I understand entirely, the question, do I have to do this? And I can see that from the outset, accreditation looks like an intimidating fact. However, I did find out in your workplace, you're not the highest up in your role, and that other roles that you might want to get in the future may well look for accreditation. I'm afraid that rather gets me to a point where I would encourage you to do it. Obviously, no one needs to do accreditation. People have got through their careers without doing accreditation. That's absolutely doable. But I think that there are two issues with accreditation. The first is what you get personally, and the other is what we get as a profession. So let's do the sort of highfalutin stuff, the profession first. If we as a profession want to improve salaries, recognition, terms and conditions and things like that, there are a couple of things that we can do. One of which I think is being able to protect the term to some extent, the conservator. So that where people want to employ a conservator and advertise for a conservator, then we as the profession can say that role isn't paid enough and encourage people not to apply. But also we as a profession can say that this is what a good conservator is. So, if you try to undercut a conservation role by bringing in someone with, no qualifications or experience and no training, then we can say, well, this is not really a conservator. And to that effect, we have tried to persuade a lot of organisations, particularly in the public sector, to identify accreditation as a desirable or essential characteristic, especially for more senior roles. So then that takes us to the second question. Do you ever want to go for one of the kinds of jobs where accreditation is required? And we did have a little bit of an exchange before I recorded this, and I think you would. So I think you just need to have a look at that accreditation. Of course, the official advice is get on the pathway. You sign up, you pay a pathway membership, and you are given support. What I would say is that for many conservators, sitting down and writing text is hard to do. So although they do great work, writing it is hard to do. I think that writing for accreditation can feel really intimidating to start with because there's lots of letters and numbers and things to remember. And you can end up trying to write to fit the accreditation standard. And I would honestly say, if you're a passionate conservator, if you've got a project that you've done recently that you really loved, why don't you just sit down and write down what you did and how you would evidence them? So, how did you assess this object and work out how it was made? How did you contact the owners? How did you record your thoughts? What options did you consider? Did you think of different ways of doing this? Did you do any additional research, either into options for materials, or perhaps to find out a little bit more about how it was made or who it was used for? Did you go and meet an exhibition person to find out how it was going to be displayed? Did you read records of either similar treatments or find out about similar things? You're bound to have done some of that, so think about all that and capture that. If you are lucky enough and well organised enough, and I would encourage everyone to do this, but if you do keep a lab diary, then the chances are a lot of that will be in there. So just really capture those thoughts and write down and explain what you did, all the way through to how you made sure it was going to be all right into the future. Did you give some advice to the owner, that sort of thing. Once you've written that first project up, just then look at the standards again, go through them, and at that point say, how many of the standards is this covered? And perhaps when you're looking at one of the standards, you might think, oh, I did that as well. I did do some communication with the public. I did a little blog. And at that point, you can add that into your text. So it's a bit like eating an elephant. It's one mouthful at a time. I would encourage you to do it. I know it's huge. Try not to think about where you've got to be in the end. Try to just think about one project, one description, and see what you've done then. You may not need it, that's absolutely the case, but there's nothing worse than your dream job coming up and then it's requiring accreditation and you can't get to it. If you think that might come up in your life, then don't let that happen. Don't let your opportunities be cut off for you before you get there. So yes, you can definitely get through your career without accreditation. Should you? It's entirely up to you. But can you? Yes, you definitely can. And if you want it, then I'm sure you can do it. And if you need any help, ask a friend, ask a colleague. There'll be lots of people out there who will help you get through. That's me, over and out.
Today I'm reviewing the Routledge Companion to Art and Disability, edited by Kerry Watson and Timothy W. Hiles. This is a 2022 Routledge publication, as you may have gathered from the title. This book is sort of aimed at scholars and students of museum studies, so it is a little bit on the academic side, which I sort of wasn't in the mood for when I was reading this, so that's a bit unfortunate. But the good news is it got better. The contents are divided into 3 parts, exploring different themes. Part 1 is about historical and religious framings of art and disability and covers a remarkable range of different topics and also geographical locations. It's anything from Ecuador to Greece, China, India, all sorts of places, and all sorts of time periods. So there's a bit of archaeology and a bit of art history, and it's a really good mix. We get to explore preconceptions around bodily depictions, Greek thoughts on mental health, whether things like blindness can be a punishment or a gift. And here it sort of ties in with the sort of deaf gain things that Pierrette talked about earlier in the episode, because it's sort of about whether you can gain other senses if you lose one and that sort of thing. We explore Japanese depictions of health conditions and the sort of social stigma that could be attached to that. What survived in sculpture versus literature from ancient India. Icons depicting healing amongst Italian Christian art. A lot of good stuff about the bodies of women and the pain of women, which I thought was just really interesting as a woman with chronic pain. Slightly harrowing were the sort of Chinese medical oil portraits that were explored in one chapter. And yeah, just in general, there was some really good stuff covered here. I would say that some of these could have done with a bit of a content warning, because some of these are really hard to read as a disabled person. Some of them in terms of the sort of bodily harm that's being described. For example, punishing people by destroying their eyes, for example, that was very difficult to read as a human being, and also as someone with just sight loss in the family. That was a lot. And yeah, some of these are really gruesome, and they explore gruesome parts of humanity, not disability itself, but just how it's been treated in the past sometimes, and how people may have ended up with disabilities. So some of them are difficult. but I would say that most of them are really interesting and, well worth a read, actually. Part 2 is about ableism and disableism. So here we are exploring ideas around the body made whole in a sort of a judgment day or resurrection of the dead scenario in Christian iconography. We've got Spanish portraits of bodily curiosities. We have a chapter exploring the effects of syphilis and the act of collecting. We've got ableist visual culture in monuments and the act of creating memorials around people with disabilities, but maybe not portraying it as such. And we even go into film and depictions of pain. It's actually a super broad approach to art, which I really appreciate. I probably could have done with seeing some video games in here, actually, but you can't have everything. My favourite in this section was probably a chapter on dwarfism in Italy and how actually it's not disability, sort of challenging the preconception that dwarfism was disability and sort of reframing that bit of history and notions that we have around dwarfism in other times. And I thought that was super interesting. Part 3 is called Towards an Aesthetics of Disability. And honestly, this was a little bit beyond me, above my head. It's a bit too art historian for me. Sorry, guys. However, I did really enjoy the chapter on prosthetics and imagination. That was an amazing little history lesson and look to the future. I enjoyed the sign language in music videos chapter and also the one about autism as ability rather than disability in relation to art, but just in general as well. And I quite liked those. I didn't really get part 3 as much as I would have liked, but I suppose it goes back to just what we were saying about museums. Not everyone can enjoy every bit of a museum and not everyone will enjoy every bit about a book. Those chapters weren't bad, they just weren't for me. But yeah, if you're interested in disability studies and you're into art in a wide variety of forms, then you should have a look at this book. It's a good edition and I'm glad that I got to read it. It was sometimes difficult to read it as a disabled person, but it was interesting and an eye-opener for many different things. No pun intended. I've been reading the ebook version for this review, which is available for $35.99 of your best British pounds from the publisher's website, or as a hardback for £190. I don't know if this is available in any other accessible formats like large print or an audiobook or anything like that. You'd have to ask the publishers, but it has 464 pages and black and white illustrations throughout.
Good morning. I am speaking to you from atop a ladder in the new exhibition at the People's History Museum called Nothing About Us Without Us, and it's an exhibition on the fight for disabled people's rights in the UK, and because it's so relevant to the episode that you've just listened to, I wanted to just, I suppose, whilst I'm up a ladder doing the lighting for the exhibition, have a quick chat about what it is the exhibition's about, really. And oh, hello, Beth. Hello. I'm just doing some recording for the episode on disability.
How's that going? Halfway up the ladder.
It's good. So we're keeping all the lights out. What's up? Sorry.
I was just going to ask your opinions on the little mount I've done and whether I just
do that.
Waste
Yeah.
time doing
So the first thing to say about the exhibition, I suppose, is that we've tried with liaising with community curator group and the community steering group. We've tried to do quite as much as we can on improving the access to the exhibition. Why isn't this light working? So basically just making sure as many people can see it as possible. The relevance to lighting, obviously, we've been doing things like having QR codes so that people can access information in different formats. We've had really large text labels, which is an interesting challenge for fitting them in cases and things, as you can imagine. Putting things at appropriate heights for different visitors, and the main relevance for what I'm doing right now is obviously lighting levels, and because of object safety and the fact that we've got loads of open display textiles, loads of different modern materials, we are keeping the lighting levels for the most part at 50 lux. However, we do have cleaning lights that I'm intending to set up to appropriately light the space as well. Each individual light in our system needs to be adjusted individually, and it takes an absolute age. So we can't do 150 lux mornings, for example, because I can't change all the lights for just one morning and all the way again, because it's just impossible. But I could potentially, if all of the lenders agree, have lighting increased by having the cleaning lights on specific spaces. So we're going to try that, but for now I'm just doing the first sweep of... Come on, it's not working. Here we go. The first sweep of lights at the normal levels, so that's why I'm up and down ladders. But I thought it'd be nice to take the opportunity to chat about each of the individual things that I'm lighting. So this one I'm up to now is a large white banner with black and white text, with red in felt and stitching. So it's stitched, applied work, felt banner, and it reads "Not Dead Yet UK." And Not Dead Yet is the campaign for against assisted suicide, and the slogan along the top says, "We need support to live, not assistance to die." And I found that really interesting because I've heard so many campaigns about assisted dying for people who decide to, but we haven't heard so much about the campaign against that. So I think just think that's really interesting. And the next one I'm going to light, the next object I'm going to light, is going to be the bronze bust of Francis Magin, founder of the British Deaf Association, 1890. He's magnificent. He's bronze, so Lucy Branch will be very happy. And he's got a fantastic moustache. So I'm now lighting the Nothing About Us Without Us Deepak Manchester banner, which is an amazing hand-painted and hand-spray-painted banner in white cotton. Deepak stands for Disabled People Against Cuts, and it's in the exhibition we've put it behind several placards about cuts and the danger of those. This is welfare cuts, the danger of those to disabled people. So, for example, we've got Tory cuts kill disabled people on one placard, and one that reads, "I am not worthless nor a drain on society. Please stop a systematic killing of vulnerable people. # human catastrophe." Can't really argue with that, can you? And it's polite, so can't complain about that. The thing I really like about this banner is that it's so obviously it's acrylic paint and cotton, but we've also got what you can see from the reverse as two painted skeletons, but on the banner they've been covered up with gaffer tape, adhesive tape. Don't know why. Possibly people thought that the skeletons were too on the nose, but it's really cool in terms of its object history. So the last bit I'm going to light this evening, it's getting a bit dark outside and late in the day, so you can probably hear the vents that turn on in the evening around the gallery. The last one I'm going to light is my favourite section, I think my favourite section of the exhibition. It's the only mannequin dressed costume we've got, seated in a wheelchair on a plinth, and it's the costume of Dennis Queen, and it's actually on loan from Dennis Queen, and it's a dress that she made and a parasol mounted behind it that she made. The acrylic paint was all flaking off, so I have done quite a bit of consolidation work on that and mounted it beautifully, I might add. It looks fantastic. So the dress and the white parasol were made for wearing in the Philadelphia Disability Pride Parade in 2016 and 17. So the dress is made out of a number of different t-shirts with different disability pride and related slogans on them. It's actually really cool from a costume making point of view, but also we've mounted it in front of a couple of the t-shirts that have been used in the costume. So it's a sort of floor length, as it were, foot length dress with pink bows to match the pink slogans, and some of the slogans are disability pride. We've got piss on pity again. What else have we got? Let's have a look. We've got the To Go Boldly slogan as well. Disability rights, the final frontier. Proud, angry and strong, which is just such a good phrase. So we've mounted it on the plinth in the wheelchair and on a white shop mannequin, but colleague Beth has done a really fantastic job of making the mannequin suitable for the costume and suitable for both the dress that we're wanting to display and the person that we're wanting to talk about. And it just looks fantastic. We put it in about 45 minutes ago, and I think every single one of us was close to tears. So I'm going to make sure to really do her justice. She's displayed in front of an Autism Pride flag and an intersex flag in a sort of parade type arrangement. The flags are mounted with magnets, if you're interested. I know you are. And it just looks wonderful. So, yeah. I wonder where that light should go. Oh, excellent. There's a track right above it. Brilliant.
If you're enjoying the C Word and would like to support our work, then please consider becoming one of our patrons. For as little as $1 per month, you can help us keep our episodes online and more of them coming. Patreon helps us meet our regular costs for the show, and also to plan ahead so we know roughly how much of a monthly budget we've got. That's super helpful when you're trying to do something special like buy a better microphone or save up to go to a special event. Your support also helps keep us free of advertisement. In return, our supporters get access to our archive of extended episodes, which you can only access on our Patreon page. Yeah, for that $1 a month, you get a little extra audio enjoyment. We've crunched the numbers, and it's about 10% extra content on a regular basis. Well, that's not bad for less than a cup of coffee, eh? If supporting us sounds like something you'd like to do, then head over to patreon.com/thecword and join our bunch of absolute champions. Thanks for listening. We're the C Word, and you've been listening to Pierrette Squires, Kloe Rumsey, and me, Jenny Mathiasen. Join us next time for an episode about redevelopments. In the meantime, check out our website at thecword.show, tweet us at thecwordpodcast, or simply email us on thecwordpodcast@gmail.com. The intro and outro music is Spring by Didi Music, used under Creative Commons Attribution License. Additional music and sound effects by Callum Robertson. This has been a Wooden Dice production. Welcome to the C Word, a conservators podcast. Whoa.
is wonderful.
That was the top of the milk bottle exploding off. I probably should put it back in the fridge. It's a good reminder.
That is hilarious.
Because if I don't find it, the cat will find it and chew it. There we go. It's a little silicone top.